Welcome back everyone. Guess what? Another still worth it video, and this time around we get to talk about another super interesting lineup of phones, more specifically a certain phone in that lineup. That lineup is the Google Pixel line, which more specifically is the Google Pixel 2 that we're talking about. Now back in the day, I owned the Nexus line, not the Nexus line, but I had the Nexus 4 as the main device, and I think that was it, but I owned basically every single Nexus phone after that because of this channel, and I reviewed basically every one too, and this lineup is one of my favorite lineup of phones ever. The Nexus line really signified what Android should have been at the time. We had like all those TouchWiz ROMs and all those LG UI ROMs, which I never really liked anyway, and stock Android was one of the biggest selling points of the Nexus line, and that's probably one of the best held up phones ever in my opinion, along with the iPhones. Then we come to the Pixel line, which is more or less the same, but I don't know what, Google took a little weirder approach for their Pixel lineup, but it is what it is, it's not a big deal. The Google Pixel 2, however, came out in 2017, and when this thing came out, it cost whatever it cost, $799, $899. It cost somewhere around there. It wasn't a cheap phone, but now this phone has depreciated so much that on Amazon you can pick one up for about $120, which is pretty crazy. For a phone that's about 3 years old at this time, it's like 2.5 now. That's some serious depreciation, which really helps us out if we want to go buy it. So it's not going to cost you an arm and leg to buy it. If you actually want to pick it up, I'll just leave a link in the description and it'll be the first link down there. You can go ahead and get it from there and help support the channel at the same time. But looking on the front of the Google Pixel 2, this thing has a 5-inch AMOLED display. Now it is a 1080p display, but when I'm using it, whenever I'm doing anything with it, it's not a bad panel. It really is more or less the same what you expect. It's a pretty decent panel at the end of the day. I think a lot of people expected it to be like Samsung quality, but it's not at that rate yet. I mean, the 1440p displays we have now really are a bit better than this one, but this panel still is pretty decent for the time. It's not like a bad panel at all, and it is OLED, so you're getting those deep blacks, really nice colors and everything. So in terms of that, it's really not that bad. Now on the top and bottom, you can see we do have a front-facing speaker. As far as I know, it's not dual front-facing speakers, it's just a front-facing speaker, which is still pretty good. I like that a lot more than not having a front-facing speaker at all. But those bezels on the front are pretty thick, but when you think about it, they do have some use to them because of those speakers, but it still kind of sucks because those bezels are super thick, and if you're using this phone in 2020, that's one of the biggest disadvantages, is the way that it looks. Even though there's some practicality behind it, it still kind of sucks. But a good thing is that it's kind of a good thing with Android 10, which this phone got, with that nav bar, it kind of went away because we use a gesture-based system now, so that's kind of a good thing. That little bit of screen real estate from those nav bar buttons are gone, so you have a little bit more screen real estate on the screen, which is nice, but it is what it is. I don't like those bezels, but I guess it's not a big deal if you think about it. We have USB Type-C on this phone, which is really cool, and on the back you have a kind of interesting design. You have like the ceramic plastic type of feeling, then you have a little bit of glass up front with that single camera sensor, and that really pretty much covers it up for this phone. You do have IP67 dust and water resistance, which is really cool, so you can go up to 1 meter of water for 30 minutes, but on top of that, that's really pretty much it. Nothing too crazy. It's just, no micro SD card slot, no removable battery, but at this time, there were really no phones that were doing it at the time, except for that removable storage. I feel like they should have done something like that, but it is what it is. They've never done it before. So that pretty much covers it up in terms of the outside. Now hitting on the software, this is one of the biggest advantages for the Google Pixel line. For a phone like the Samsung Galaxy S8, for example, that phone came out the same year. It's actually older than the Google Pixel 2, kind of, it came out in the same year, and that phone just stopped getting support for software. However, with the Google Pixel 2, we saw that it got Android 10, and it's going to get the next version of Android on top of that, which is going to be Android 11. So usually for those phones that came out in the same year, it usually lasts at least one extra version of software on top of that, which is super impressive. And the software is really good software. It's not like you're getting some like weirded, bloated software version on top. No, it's completely stock. Whatever Google advertises on their, Google show that they usually do for their Android versions, that's all the features you're going to get, and it's super nice. And that's one of the biggest advantages for the Google Pixel line. Not only is software support great, you're getting software for a super long time for an Android phone, but you're also getting very good software, which is super important. Hardware is one thing, software is a whole nother ballpark, and it's not a great combination if you have great hardware and bad software, or you have good software with bad hardware. It's a good medium, and the Google Pixel 2 is a very good medium in that standpoint. I will say though that you can always root this thing and custom ROM it. If you want to go down that route, you have that capability. There's still a bit of development community behind it, so you can unlock a couple more features here and there if you do custom ROMing. But even at its core, it's still a good phone for the software, and even when it's done getting software support next year, you be my guest, go ahead and root it, go ahead and ROM it, but as of right now, I don't really see the need to do it, but you can always do it if you want that capability. So that pretty much covers it up there. Now hitting on the performance, This thing was released with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 835 chipset, an octa-core CPU, and Adreno 540 GPU, and there were two different models of the Google Pixel 2. There was a 64 and 128GB model, and both those models had 4GB of RAM. Now, what I like most about the Google Pixel 2 would probably be the performance. Well, actually, I take that back. It's the software, obviously, but the performance of this phone is still pretty decent. Now, the biggest disadvantage, I'll just get this out of the way, the 4GB of RAM really didn't do it any favor. I mean, I feel like they could have put a little bit more into it, but they didn't even increase it, I think, until the Pixel 4, and I don't even think they increased it there. Phones nowadays in 2020 at 4GB is probably the lowest I would go. That's probably the lowest I would go, to be honest. The Pixel 2, it definitely gets the job done whenever I'm doing anything with it, when I'm opening apps, going through the UI and everything. It's a smooth experience, mostly because of the software. We have really great software that doesn't really suck up a lot of the performance, so that's really nice. We don't have a lot of background processes, but I think that RAM is just one of the things that kind of sucks about it, but it is what it is. A lot of phones in 2017 didn't have, 6 or 8 or 10GB of RAM. Something like the Galaxy S8, that also had 4GB of RAM as well. And I said the same thing about that phone too, so whenever I'm doing anything with it, it's a very good performing phone, I'll say, for the most part. Whenever I'm doing really minor tasks, like, going to Safari, texting somebody, but whatever the case is, you're going to be fine. Once you kind of go into that higher ballpark things, it's just the only issue is keeping things in the background. I feel like Android 10 is still kind of wishy-washy for a couple of things. I feel like it kind of accidentally closes some apps in the background. I feel like they need to kind of fix that a little bit. But again, once you have those apps loaded and everything, it's really not that big of a deal. It performs just like any other phone. So I think performance is a very, very good thing about this phone. It's definitely a pro. I don't think it's a con. Again, the RAM is the only thing I would hit on, but I've said that 50 times now. So I think this phone in terms of performance gets a thumbs up in my books. There's really not too much to hate on it there. So that pretty much covers it up in terms of the performance standpoint. Now, hitting on the camera, this thing has a single 12.2 megapixel back-facing camera. We have optical image stabilization on it, which is really nice. We have a front-facing 8 megapixel camera. That front camera can shoot 1080p on it. Now, what I can tell you about this camera is that, first of all, you can shoot 4K at 30 frames, which is cool. The Pixel 4 still can only do 4K at 30 frames, so hopefully they'll change that next year. But one thing I really like about this camera is that the quality is very good, and on top of that, the software is pretty decent too. It's not like a super bloated, weird looking software. It's pretty minimal at its core, and there's still a couple cool features you have in it, which is nice. The only disadvantage for this camera, which I've said about many cameras in the same caliber, is that you are lacking those hardware features. In this day and age in 2020, like back in 2017, I guess it wasn't that big of a deal, but now in 2020, we have so many phones that have so many camera sensors, and that's one of the biggest developments in the phone community are the cameras. We don't have a telephoto lens, we don't have an ultra wide sensor on this phone, we don't even have one or the other, so that's kind of a big disadvantage. I think the quality is still great, but quality is kind of subjective, but I think the quality is fine, and video quality is fine. Audio quality is not the best, but the biggest disadvantage would be those camera hardware features, and that's a big disadvantage for this phone. It is what it is, but I wish it was a little bit better. I wish they had a couple more sensors on it, but they didn't even add it until the Pixel 4, so it is what it is. I'm not freaking out about it too much, but that pretty much covers it up in terms of the camera. Now, ending it off with the battery life, this thing has a 2700 mAh battery. It's non-removable, it's stuck inside, and I think the battery life is probably one of the most average things about this phone. I don't think it's a great performing device in terms of the battery, but I also don't think it's a bad performing device in terms of battery. The software is pretty stock, so there's not really too many things going on in the background that suck up a lot of battery, but it really just depends on your usage and your use case. For me personally, I don't really use my phone that much as I might think. Maybe I use it a lot more, I don't know, but in terms of the battery, if you keep it on standby, that's pretty decent. It has pretty good standby time, but when you're using it, it really doesn't drain that fast either, so I could probably say you probably get a day out of it. It's pretty average. It might be a little bit below average at the worst of it, but it's really not bad. The battery's probably degraded a little bit, not as much as you might think, but it is what it is, and that pretty much covers up my opinion on the battery life. Now, a couple more things I wanted to hit on. Basically, one major thing with older phones with OLED displays. Now, I'm going to start mentioning this. When you get them used, that's the only way to get a Pixel 2 nowadays. You can only get it used. A lot of these phones do have a lot of burn-in on them, so I would recommend you to at least look at the phones. Make sure, there's not a ton of burn-in on the displays. One thing I like about Android 10 is that it does remove that nav bar if you choose it to. You can use that gesture-based design, and that will eliminate that nav bar burn-in that we see on so many displays. So if that's the case, you have that capability, which is really cool. But to answer the question, should you pick up a Google Pixel 2 in 2020? Again, I'm going to say 100% yes. There's really not even a specific demographic I would recommend this phone to. It's just a really good phone overall, and it's super cheap. At that $120 price tag, there's really not many more phones that are like that. It's cheap. You can get it for not that much money. If you break it, it's not a big deal because it will just cost you a little bit more to fix it. It's stock Android, and you're still getting another version of Android on top of that, which is super nice. The build quality is good, performance is good, the camera quality is great. It's just missing those camera features, but at the end of the day, I think the Google Pixel 2 is still a pretty decent pickup in 2020, and that pretty much covers it. If you guys have any other questions or anything, leave it down in the comment section below. Hit that like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel, all those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate it if you guys could check it out. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.